Welcome to Alienating the Audience, a podcast that goes so deep into science fiction, you risk getting the bins if you turn off the episode too fast. And today, we are going to go very deep indeed. We are going to explore the origins of life itself. Where would it happen? Where could it happen? And if it happened somewhere else, could we breed with it? Leading our away team is none other than Dr. Mohamed Noor, head of biology at Duke University, who is not only a super cool guy and a self-evidently fun professor, he might have the most encyclopedic command of Star Trek knowledge I have ever encountered in my life. Which is good, because he wrote an entire book explaining genetics through Star Trek. After the interview, Nick Sperduti and I purchase a protocol droid to try to smooth some of the recent bumps out in our social life. Grab your tricorder, because we're about to land on an alien planet that's teeming with awesome. My guest today is Dr. Mohamed Noor. He is a professor of biology at Duke University and the director of natural sciences at Duke University. But for our purposes today, he is the author of Live Long and Evolve, What Star Trek Can Teach Us About Evolution, Genetics, and Life on Other Worlds. Dr. Noor, I'm excited to have you on.
Thanks. It's an honor. I'm excited to be here.
And you come to the program via Dr. Aaron McDonald, who is now my other scientist friend. Sci-fi podcasts have been great for expanding my network of people who actually know what they're talking about in the realm of science.
Aaron's great. Dr. McDonald is fantastic. I've done talks with her at various conventions, and yeah, we make a great team. I love doing things with her.
Are you? I think she gets invited on like cruises. She's doing like Star Trek cruises. Have you get in on that?
So she's already done the Star Trek cruise last year, and she's doing it again this year. I'm doing it for the first time this year, and I'm excited to actually get to give a talk with her on that cruise as well.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay, if they ever need a comedic warm-up act, I could say, so my claim to fame is I've done warm-up for William Shatner, who said, I said, and I quote, "You're very funny." So I've got that going for me. So if they ever need that, if they're like, oh man, people aren't sufficiently ebullient on the Star Trek cruise, we could do that.
I'll write that down.
but I enjoyed your book, and I wish that I had that book in college, or actually, I wish I'd had it in high school, because it did a great job of explaining how genetics works while keeping me completely engaged by constantly plugging in Star Trek references and using aliens to explain it. So I thought we'd work our way through evolution, what life on other worlds might look like, what genetics and sex are like in the realm of Star Trek, and then just get into some general Star Trek nerddom questions. So kicking it off with evolution, you begin your book by talking about the origin of life on the planet, and you go through various Star Trek scenarios, and you have three specific Star Trek scenarios for the theory of origin of life, and I believe they were directed: Pseudo Panspermia, Ancient Alien Astronauts, and From Earth to the Stars. And these would be separate than just life develops on its own on Earth. So let's walk through those possibilities that Star Trek has provided us that probably aren't true.
That sounds great. Well, one of them is not too far off, or at least could be close.
Which one's that?
The last one. The last one could be, or could have elements of truth to it.
Oh, well, so let's
the other two, not so much.
So from Earth to the stars, that's the idea that maybe evolution happened as per usual, except someone scooped up human beings and then dropped them off on Earth, or vice versa.
Well, so the someone scooped up part, that of course gets into the less realistic, but the idea that life evolved here on Earth and then was introduced to other worlds in some way, that is not crazy in some sense. But we can get to it after we go through the other two, though.
Okay. Well, yeah, okay, then we'll start with that. So directed pseudo panspermia. What is that?
Yes. So this comes from the Star Trek Next Generation episode, The Chase. And usually if you talk to people about like why are there so many humanoid aliens in Star Trek, that's the episode they always bring up.
Right.
And in that
great
episode,
for retconning. Yep.
Yeah. So in that race, there was this ancient race, 4 billion years ago, that seeded all these different worlds in some sense with life. They were a little bit unspecific about exactly what that meant in the context of seeding life. So I think I'm pulling up the quote right here. It said, "So we left you, Our scientists seeded the primordial oceans of many worlds where life was in its infancy. The seed codes directed your evolution toward a physical form resembling ours. So it's a little bit unclear what exactly that meant, where life was in its infancy. Does that mean there was no life? Or was there a very simple life and they in some way manipulated it? So the pseudo-panspermia idea, having the word pseudo in there, means that some raw materials for life were introduced to Earth. So that implies that there was no life already on Earth, but something was introduced, let's say some sugars or something that then was able to continue our process to having the first life form. Mm-hmm. So that idea, in and of itself, that idea is not crazy. I mean, there are, extraterrestrially formed amino acids that we see, that land on Earth from meteorites. It's possible. Maybe the first couple of a particular kind landed at an opportune time from a comet or meteor or something like that. Yeah, that's okay. The problem with that one isn't so much the pseudopanspermia on Earth, but this seed codes directing evolution over 4 billion years. That's a really, really long time on Earth to create something that is that can hybridize with a Vulcan, that can hybridize with, a Romulan, that can hybridize all these other species.
Which in the Star Trek universe, pretty much everybody can have viable offspring with everybody else. You have to be real careful with prophylactics in the Star Trek universe.
Oh, yeah. I mean, literally by that model, we're more closely related to grass than we are to a Vulcan. I mean, just as an extreme example there, because grass evolved much more recently. We share a much more recent common ancestor with grass than we would by that model with a Vulcan. So how on Earth, well, actually, I guess on Earth is the problem. How in the world could that have actually resulted in something that could be interfold? I don't think that's possible, because really what that rules out is the important role of chance events in our evolution. And we know of many, many instances where chance events had a huge role in shaping humans as they are today. So one of the ones I brought up in the book is, of course, 65 million years ago, we had that asteroid impact in Mexico. That's what really helped, along with volcanic activity, knock back the dinosaurs. And that's what allowed the radiation of mammals, including us.
Yay, Team Mammal, go asteroid.
Yeah, right. Exactly. So did they aim asteroids to hit all those other worlds 65 million years ago too? And that's just one chance event. There's so many big chance events that affected our evolution in a huge way. There's no way we would have something that's so similar, that looks so much like us, that's interferable with us on another world, based on that model. So that one, I think I have to put a big X on.
I was at the Smithsonian Museum of Naturals, I think it's Natural History, a couple of years ago, and I was walking through all of the older evolutionary displays, and it got to rats, and I felt this striking team instinct of go tiny hair creatures, I'm rooting for you. So yay asteroid there. Am I right in thinking, because I've kind of pulling it into the non-Star Trek universe in which we live, that if we found life on Mars, it may not actually tell us a lot about the origin of life itself, because there's enough debris that over time bounces back and forth between our planets that it's entirely possible that life developed here, hitched a ride on a meteorite to Mars, or vice versa. It's possible that life actually developed on Mars and then jumped over to Earth, and it's just that we managed to survive.
Yeah, there are many Martian meteorites that are found here on Earth. And as you can imagine, from that asteroid impact on Earth 65 million years ago, I bet that sent many, many chunks of Earth out into space, of which it's possible some landed on Mars. Sure.
Okay. All right. So second theory of life in the Star Trek universe, ancient alien astronauts.
Yeah. So this came up. I'm trying. Which episode was that? I'm pulling up from my book to see which episode that was.
I was wondering about that because you were quoting the alien species a minute ago, and I was like, does Dr. Noor just have a stack of Star Trek quotes on his desk? That would be amazing.
I just grabbed my book and went to the page. Oh yeah, this is from the episode Return to Tomorrow. So this is one where, you remember, there's the glowing balls sitting there, and Kirk, Spock, and everybody beamed down.
Yeah, Sargon.
The young Dr. Pulaski, who at the time was Anne Mulhall. It's the same actress. That's why I said the young Dr. Pulaski.
Oh, right. Yeah. People forget she was in TOS.
Right. So there the quote was, 6,000 centuries ago, our vessels were colonizing this galaxy, just as your own starships have now begun to explore this vastness. As you now leave your own seed on distant planets, so we left our seed behind us. Perhaps your own legends of an Adam and an Eve were two of our travelers. So, that's saying that life on Earth may have come 600,000 years ago, or at least humanoid life. Now, obviously, there was life on Earth already at that time, but humanoid life landed on Earth 600,000 years ago. So that timing is not bad. It just not considering anything else, the timing is not that bad, because if you think about what were the humanoids on Earth at the time, there was Homo erectus was very abundant here on Earth. You could imagine Homo erectus from 600,000 years ago, if that were on Earth, moving to today, becoming modern humans. Fair. I mean, that's probably what happened. On Vulcan, maybe getting pointed ears. Now, of course, I will say, people always bring this up when I mention Vulcans. They say, what about the whole green blood thing? I'm ignoring the green blood thing.
Okay. Yeah.
Set that aside for a minute. Don't worry about the copper-based blood. But anyway, in terms of just slight differences in appearance, sure. Yeah, that timing is okay. The big flaw with that one,
it could potentially dovetail with some other things as well. So there's what's it called, the cognitive revolution. There's a jump about 200,000 years ago, because there's anatomically modern humans. We're around about 300,000 years, but there's some point where we go from like using pretty dull spear points to suddenly making cave paintings and things like that. And we're not really sure what accounts for that jump. So in this scenario, maybe a couple of astronauts come down from another civilization and breed with all the Homo erectuses, and that results in speech and language and that kind of thing.
Yeah. Oh, there was something. I think, wasn't there an episode of Voyager where like the Native Americans were visited by some alien species and given some gift or something like that?
Right. Yeah. Chakotay's people. Yeah.
Exactly. So, I mean, that part's okay. The problem with that one is it suggests that we're not related to other animals here on Earth. Which, like, that's no.
Well, would it mean that we're would it mean that we are 100% not related, or would it just mean that we have two different planets of ancestries? Like, we're half Homo erectus, but we're also half species Beta 4259 or whatever.
So that's a great question. The way it was worded was, your own Legends of Adam and Eve were two of our travelers. True. And that would imply that, it's 100% alien,
right?
Which that we can definitively show is not true.
Yeah.
Now, is it possible that like we have some alien, like some very small fraction of alien DNA? There's nothing to indicate that is true. However, it would be difficult to definitively exclude that. Though that essentially that just pushes the question back. Well, then who are these aliens who could interbreed with us?
Right.
That recently too. So I mean, basically you need to invoke another one of the explanations for that one to still work.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
In and of itself, it's not sufficient.
And then from Earth to the stars, and that's more of a transplant scenario.
Exactly. So this is the one from the episode The Paradise Syndrome. So this is the one where the original series Enterprise is going around. They go down to some planet. Oh, look, there's like orange trees, and look, there's a group of Native Americans sitting in teepees and they're fishing, and like it was a little ridiculous in many senses.
Is it entirely possible that the set of Star Trek just had an extra Western set on hand from another unrelated show, and they're like, listen, guys, you would really be doing us a solid if we didn't have to build a new set this week, something involving Native Americans, space Native Americans, and they were like, yeah, we could do that.
Well, given we had a space Abraham Lincoln, I guess it's not the furthest out thing they had there. So with that one, what happened is Spock later on was talking to McCoy, and he said, I'll pull up the quote, "The obelisk is a marker. It was left by a super race known as the Preservers. They passed through the galaxy, rescuing primitive cultures which were in danger of extinction and seeding them, so to speak, where they could grow and live. And that was supposed to explain why there's so many humanoids out there." So that's interesting, because again, it's just that something came to Earth, grabbed some of the life from on Earth. So in that sense, the orange trees and things that were there may very well have been actual orange trees. The humans that are there are just basically humans. So you could extrapolate this, and let's say these preservers were around not just for the last couple of thousand years when they were Native Americans, but take it back to like hundreds of thousands of years or something like that. That's aside from the physical challenges of finding a world that could sustain all this, I mean, you can't just plop people down on Neptune and they'd be okay, obviously.
Right.
It has to be a planet where these things can be sustained.
You need really good sweaters if you're going to live on Neptune.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
If you could get something where you could get, like, say, the things that we would eat, then if you could take the microbes, you could take the trees and put all that stuff there and put it on some other place. Yeah, I mean, it's terraforming is essentially what it's coming down to. But imagine some terraforming was happening, 600,000 years ago. Sure, could they have evolved to look more like Vulcans do over that time in some particular environment? Yeah, that's reasonable. And at that point, the interbreeding is not nearly as much of a problem. And in fact, we know there was ancient humanoid interbreeding here on Earth, because we know that modern humans have some DNA from ancient Neanderthals, from ancient Denisovans, all these other modern humanoids. So that That actually is very doable. Now, again, the challenge being that something came and brought them over, so that has the same problem I was mentioning with the other one, that something had to have transplanted this life. But on a more general sense, could life have been introduced to these other worlds? And this comes back to the point you made earlier regarding Mars. It's quite possible there are, say like some fungal spores or something like that sitting on Mars that got introduced there because, by being kept in some sort of Earth meteorite and landing over there, that in the right environment they could then flourish.
And rooting for Team Mammal to flourish on Mars. Well,
right.
so then having dispensed with those three scenarios within Star Trek, and I'll add another one that you point out in the book, which would not pertain to the origin of life, but I think is an interesting thought experiment, is the idea that there have been intelligent species that independently arose on Earth and then just left or died out.
Like the Voth.
Yeah, the Voth. Yeah, in Voyager they do that. I think there's a Doctor Who episode like that as well, but basically the idea that there were super intelligent dinosaurs at some point, which I thought about, and I was like, if let's say that some dinosaur species got to the point where it was of similar intelligence to us or a dolphin or a whale, and it could communicate, I don't know in any way, shape, or form we could possibly determine that based on the fossil record. So it's possible that there were intelligent species running around 400 million years ago. Probably not with spaceships, but possibly with sign language.
Maybe they're the humpback whales from Star Trek 4.
Yeah. Well, so having dispensed with those three theories, then getting into the origin of life, Star Trek covers that as well in All Good Things. Q takes Captain Picard back to the very beginning of all life on Earth, where I think it's 2 amino acids combined with each other, or something to that effect, and something doesn't happen. Something I was curious to talk to you about is: do we think that there is literally one origin point for all life, or is it?
Yes.
Okay, so it's because I wondered if maybe it's a conditional thing where if you get the right temperature, the right amino acids, if it's like a boiling point where life would just start popping up all over the place. But we don't think that happened where there were 6 or 7 different forms of life that all came up around the same time. It's one puddle turned into all life.
Well, let me modify a little bit what I said. So we think that all current life on Earth has a single origin. Now, it's possible other times, life kind of erupted independently and then died off or something like that, but we've never found that life or any descendants from that life. But everything that you know today, like us, including your own gut bacteria, we're all related. Right. So in that sense, yes.
And you point out in the book something that I enjoy that was worth or that I noodled for a while was that all life is equally evolved. All life is 4 billion years old, because it's not like it's just been sitting there on a shelf. It's been all life has been changing and adapting at the same time.
Exactly. People always like to refer to humans as like the pinnacle of evolution. Oh, we're more evolved. Like, what does that mean? What do you mean more evolved? I mean, by what measure? It's not by size. It's whales are much more evolved than we are by that. It's not by amount of DNA. There's like lots of plants that have way more DNA than we have. So I mean, we tend to describe ourselves as more evolved because we're very biased, and we tend to do it in the context of knowledge meaning that we know how to make nuclear missiles or something like that, I guess.
Well, on that note, then, like I'm curious. Do we know of any relationship between evolutionary pressure and intelligence? Is intelligence just one of many random traits which could be useful, or is there? I think Star Trek tends to be kind of Whiggish in its interpretation of evolution, in that there is a sort of railroad track that all life eventually follows towards intelligence, which is a nice literary trope to use, but not one that's based on scientific fact. But is there are there things correlated with intelligence, or is it just random that chimps happen to figure out that was or whatever proto ancestors of us and chimps happen to find that big brains were more useful than sharp claws?
Well, it's funny because even to think about what even intelligence means, right? I mean, it's very hard to define that. There are, like, for example, we used to say a long time ago, people would say that humans are the only animals that use tools. We know for a fact that's absolutely not true. Yeah. I mean, crows use tools. There are a lot of things that do that. But what exactly does intelligence even mean? And people sometimes say, well, about self-awareness? I have no idea what other animals might be self-aware.
That's a good point. We haven't been able to talk to them.
Yeah, right. I mean, maybe some of them are. Maybe, and there's at least indications sometimes that, say dogs, for example, they have some sort of self-awareness to it. I mean, they don't confuse themselves with us. They know, like, they see their reflection, they know that's them.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I think that's one of the tests, right? Is the reflection test. Like chimps have done pretty well at that, where chimps understand that there's a difference between them and their reflection and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and it's funny to think in the context of the search for extraterrestrial life that we're always searching for extraterrestrial intelligence that would respond to a radio signal kind of thing. But, even on Earth, say like 200 years ago, there would have been no response to that, right?
Yeah.
So, and you wouldn't have said there wasn't intelligent life on Earth 200 years ago. I mean, that's not that long ago at all, but there certainly weren't radio telescopes or the ability to respond to radio telescope signals. So it's kind of funny that that's the way we chose to go forward. Like, that's a very, very, very narrow definition.
Well, actually, and this is beyond the confines of our Star Trek chat, but do you have an opinion on the Fermi Paradox? This is one of my favorite things to ramble about at parties. I am fascinated by the Fermi Paradox, and for people unfamiliar with it, very quickly, the Fermi Paradox is basically the idea of we're kind of on the outer edge of the galaxy. Stars towards the core are much older than we are. So if life happens, and it happens with some regularity, we can reasonably infer that there's a bunch of it and that a lot of it's much, much, much older than us. So how come no one's come by to say hi and be neighborly yet? And there's a ton of different scenarios for that. The thing you bring up a moment ago, Doctor, that if you were to try and communicate with us 200 years ago, you couldn't, I think is a good indication that maybe aliens have swung by 8-9 times now, or they've observed us, and the last time they observed us, we were still killing stuff with sticks, and they were like, we'll come back in another million years.
or they came close enough and they tried to signal, but they didn't actually come. They didn't beam down or send a shuttlecraft down.
What are they doing? Like, we're cranking out our AM radio waves, and nobody's responding.
Yeah, right. Oh, man. Yeah, no, I don't have a strong opinion on that. I do think that the odds of us finding something that can communicate with us in the way we're thinking is incredibly low. If we're going to find some sort of extraterrestrial life, I think we're much more likely to find it by scooping up liquid from Europa and finding some microbe there doing something than we are to get a response to a "hello, are you out there" kind of radio signal.
Yeah, that makes sense. I was just reading a book by, I think it's Ted Lieu, Story of Your Life and Others. And one of the stories in there was the basis for, I think it's, and it's not Contact, it's something like that. It was an Amy Adams film from a few years ago, but he really gets into how difficult it would be to develop communication with an alien species that has a different cognitive form. And in that story, those aliens are basically they're not linear thinkers. They don't think in time the same way we do. They think of it in terms of radial stuff. So it's fascinating and very difficult to get into the headspace.
Yeah, and time is an interesting one, too. We assume that things would react in the same times with which we react. But imagine something, and this was actually shown in Star Trek various times, imagine something that's just operating either at a much, much slower speed or a much, much faster speed than we're used to operating. Right. And you can imagine something where it's here and it's gone and it's trying to communicate with us and it's left before we even were aware of a presence of anything. Or the opposite. It looks like a rock to us. It's communicating, but over the course of like a millennium.
Yeah. Or if there were a planet where there's like a giant megaforest that works like a neural synapses, but it's going at a tree pace, then it could be very intelligent. But we would show up and be like, all right, well, pretty fall, good foliage. I guess we'll have a picnic, then go back to the ship.
Yeah.
So if you were taking bets on places we might find life other than an M-class planet, you mentioned Europa a moment ago. What kind of places would be more likely, do you think, to have had their own independent origin point of life outside of a nice, warm, watery planet with soil?
Yeah, it's hard to know the answer to that because our sample size is literally just one.
Right, we've got one. Yeah, exactly.
We've seen one exact example. So I mean, since we know that example, I understand why the search for extraterrestrial life in general tends to focus on planets like ours. Go like, well, we know it worked once. Whereas everywhere else, as far as we know, it's never worked. So I get that. So I'd break it down in the context of what we need for life to happen. So we need a solvent for life, and we need a backbone for life. So in terms of the solvent, water is a fantastic backbone. It's polar, it's liquid at a wide range of temperatures, things like that. So in that sense, I mean, plants that have liquid water would be a good source for that. But liquid water isn't the only possibility there. So we could, for example, use something like liquid ammonia. Liquid ammonia is, this would be better in a colder environment. So ammonia is liquid from, I just looked it up right now, from minus 77 degrees centigrade to 98 degrees centigrade.
Okay.
At 60 times the atmospheric pressure of Earth. So if you have a plant that has very high atmospheric pressure, ammonia is actually quite good. And that, 60 times the atmospheric pressure of Earth sounds like it's a lot, but that's actually less than the pressure on the surface of Venus, for example. So and ammonia is abundant across the universe. We see hydrogen is the most abundant element in the universe, and nitrogen's pretty high up there. So yeah, that could work. So that's one other kind of solvent. Just giving it an example. It doesn't have to be liquid water. There could be something else. And liquid ammonia, even at sort of Earth kind of pressures, works much better at much colder temperatures. Whereas water would be frozen solid. Liquid ammonia could actually be still liquid. In terms of the backbone, actually carbon is the best, I think.
Okay, and that's why Star Trek is always saying carbon-based life.
Yeah, well, not always. Remember, they did introduce the Horta.
Yeah, they do have silicate life. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And silicon, people always bring that up as a good alternative to carbon, because if they're in the same column of the periodic table, each carbon atom can bind to 4 other atoms, which is really good. Silicon can do the same, but carbon has a huge advantage over silicon in that it can make these long chains much more readily than silicon can. It's harder to do that with silicon. Silicon is much more likely to want to bind to like oxygen or hydrogen than a whole bunch more silicons in a row. So in that sense, carbon is a very good candidate for that. So that gives an idea of something to be looking for. And at least I think more, actually, I'm trying to remember which one is more generally abundant. I think silicon is more abundant here on Earth than carbon is, but I think carbon is more abundant in the universe. I could be wrong about that piece, though. Okay. I'm definitely not a biochemist. I apologize.
You're okay. You're running circles around me. You mentioned solvent and you mentioned backbone. Am I right in thinking that there would need to be some kind of energy supply as well? Like we have abundant solar energy. If we were to go to Europa, there's probably geothermal activity that would provide heat. So could it come in different forms?
Absolutely. And maybe, what would be really cool is if there could be something that could use cosmic rays. That would be fantastic.
Yeah, like I wonder, like you mentioned that in the book, that like there could be something that feeds off X-rays. So even if you're, I guess to deep inside a planet or there's some different, maybe there's no atmosphere at all, but it's living in tunnels and the X-rays are able to penetrate that and it can feed off of them.
Absolutely.
Ah, okay.
It's certainly possible, but it's really hard to imagine because all those things interplay with each other. Like you couldn't have something, for example, in a really high temperature that had something that's really close to a sun, for example, that might be really good in terms of the energy part, but that would be really bad if the main solvent there is water, because then it just would evaporate or even more so liquid ammonia. So yeah, the interplay of all of those things is really important. So it's hard to pick something that matches all those things without just falling back on the simple explanation of it must be like it is on Earth.
So if in theory, if we went to another planet, we started walking around the tree planet or wherever,
a tree planet, of course, has life. So
right. Well, I'm thinking in terms of how we would interact with it. In that, you point out that you and I are more closely related to grass than we would be a Cardassian. And in fact, even
based on that one model, now from the Earth to the stars model, then we're more closely related to the Cardassian.
Right. Yes. But even if there was some very, very, very distant ancestor, if it's 4 million years ago, there's still been more genetic deviation between the Cardassian goo that they dropped off and the goo that we have. So that being said, something I'm curious about, like they never do this in science fiction, and it would probably be irritating, and I wouldn't want them to focus on it. But I assume if you could do intergalactic travel, that your allergies would be terrible. That you would just constantly be hacking and wheezing and having to take Claritin D and that kind of thing. Would, like, if you and I visited another planet, would we have allergies? Or alternately, would I have no idea what a foreign DNA would do to your DNA, whether your body would view it agnostically and just it wouldn't compute, or alternately, if it would just cut you to pieces, or whether you would step foot on the planet and the whole thing would just wilt and die over 100 years. What do you think?
It could, literally any of those possibilities is out there. And actually, one of the big questions right off the bat is: if the thing is not related to us, does it even have DNA?
Right. Yeah.
Right. There's a lot of extra pieces that come into that. It's interesting to me. So I mean, I was teasing a little bit about the trees elsewhere too. It's interesting to me how often all the different planets they go to in Star Trek have trees and things like that. And it's funny, they'll beam down and they'll see the trees everywhere, and they just say, "Oh, there's no life."
Yep.
What? Like, what's all around you? But so many worlds in Star Trek seem to have trees, and nobody's ever tried to explain that piece. I mean, did that ancient race there like seed the trees everywhere too?
There's an intergalactic Johnny Appleseed who's just like, I love forests. I'm going to drop off as many acorns as I can across as many planets as I can.
so much like grass and shrubs and it's just completely not discussed. I would love some. I have a friend who's a botanist. I've been trying to convince her to go to conventions at some point in time and talk about depictions of plants in Star Trek. Which is the most hilarious being that weird. I don't remember if you remember the little puppet flower thing from the original series.
Oh, is that the one that like shoots poison at people?
Not that one. There's that too, but there's one point. I don't remember the exact scene of the episode, but I remember there's one. It's very clearly a hand puppet because it's got like 5 little petals and it's moving around. And somebody walks into the room who is not who they appeared to be, and all of a sudden it shrivels down and makes a little whiny sound. And it's like, oh, I wonder what's wrong with it. Like this is this weird talking plant. This thing was so obviously a hand puppet. But I would love to see a talk on plant life in other worlds in Star Trek.
Yeah, I suspect you're right. I suspect that my guess is that from a writer's background, I'm guessing that most of the writers in the original series were probably, if they were with some sort of STEM background, more likely to be engineers, is my guess, than to be biologists, and certainly not botanists. Because I think you're right. No, that is the thing. They're like when they take life is always a shorthand for life we can talk to in Star Trek.
And sometimes they say animal life, but sometimes they do just say life.
We mentioned earlier that in the Star Trek universe, you can mate with pretty much any species and produce viable offspring. Am I right in thinking that would be less likely in real life? If we go to another planet, possible, but probably not super likely, and probably even less likely that the offspring would be viable to reproduce.
The chance is almost zero.
Yeah. Although in Star Trek doesn't you pointed out in the book, and I hadn't realized this, that there's a couple of times where there's a couple within Star Trek that are mating and want to have children, and they experience difficulty, and they have
Klingons.
Which so like B'Elanna Torres then would not have been an inadvertent thing, but probably involved in the same sense that on Earth you can have fertility drugs and things like that that would be necessary for Klingons and humans or various other species.
Yep, that's right. And I think that also came up in the context of Vulcans, too, in Enterprise. I think there was a discussion about T'Pol and Trip that in order to be interfertile, I think it was in the episode E2 when like a future Enterprise came back in time, and like they were able to have kids, but there was something about like how the Dr. Phlox had engineered a way for them to have kids.
Right. Or I also wonder if perhaps in that type of scenario, it wouldn't be a 50-50 split on genetic material. So, for example, on Earth right now, we've had children that have been born that have quote unquote 3 parents. But what that means is that there have been situations where a couple had some sort of recessive gene that was problematic, and they were able to get a gene put in from a third parent. So, in other words, the kid is 99.99999% mom and dad, but there is one other person whose gene has been inputted into their genome. So, I wonder if there couldn't be a situation like that where it's like, well, basically human, but we want them to have pointed ears because, dad is a Vulcan or something like that.
Oh, yeah, that'd be very doable. And actually, I think that even came up in the context of B'Elanna when she was having the kid with Tom Paris. There was discussion about like getting rid of the forehead ridges and doing a manipulation to do that. That would be very doable for some things, especially if there's a particular gene that's causing some sort of incompatibility with the foreign genome. That technology to do that right now pretty much already exists. It's not mainstream, but it pretty much already exists in labs to do that sort of thing.
Can you walk us through epigenetics? Because this is I don't think epigenetics was a field that existed when I was in high school, or otherwise Deer Creek Public Schools did not launch into it when I was in high school. but when I first encountered this, when I was growing up, they would kind of scoffingly bring up Jean-Baptiste Lamarck as the sort of dim-witted version of Darwin, and that basically giraffes stretch their neck, and then the subsequent species or the subsequent offspring stretch their neck, and the neck gets longer and longer that way, and that doesn't happen because of natural selection. But with epigenetics, I gather it's more like our genes are a series of light switches, and you inherit them with an on or an off. So you actually do affect your what you do in this life does affect what your offspring are. It's not just a cold predetermined amount of genes, but you do have some effect on them.
Yeah, so that's an interesting thing. That word gets used in a lot of different contexts, and sometimes I think kind of incorrectly, even within the scientific community. Some people talk about epigenetics just in the context of which genes are turned on and off and for how much. That's something, I mean, we've known about that for like over 50 years. This is not a new idea that genes within an individual can be turned on or off. And that's why, for example, certain cells within your body, develop to become heart cells versus developing to become nerve cells versus developing to become, skin cells, whatever. So that is well established. Now, what you're referring to now is sort of this transgenerational epigenetics, that some bit of DNA is in some way modified such that now it's actually going to do something slightly different in the next generation. And one possible means for that, for example, is like a chemical mark on a certain part of the DNA. So the addition of a methyl group, so methyl is CH3, so an addition of a methyl group on there. And what that can do is that can affect whether that particular gene is turned on or off. And if it's inherited with this this edit to it, then that in the next generation will still make it so it's still off, for example. So that gets at the aspect you're talking about with regard to the long necks. Now, generally speaking, most of those sort of methyl groups, most of that gets completely erased as you go to the next generation. But there have been a couple of cases identified where, sometimes some little mark does persist. It looks like maybe there's a little bit more evidence for it in plants than in animals, but a little bit in animals as well. And that can make it so something that happens in your life can edit, in some sense, your DNA to then affect your kid's life. Now, how long-term that works, basically, does that continue on to your grandkids and great-grandkids or not, or does it eventually get it out there? That's a little less certain. It seems like maybe it is kind of limited in terms of how it goes, because again, most of those marks do get erased when you're making gametes, but every now and then something can slip through.
Oh, and on the note of gametes, it also occurs to me in the Star Trek universe, we always assume that excuse me, that genitals are completely compatible, and it's probably best that they don't get into that in great.
I'm glad they don't. That would be really awkward.
Great detail, but we could reasonably infer that probably there's a lot of different sorts that are going on there in general. Okay, so with in the Star Trek universe, there's a preponderance of males and females. There are exceptions. Yep. On our planet, there's a preponderance of males and females. In general, why does evolution seem to prefer a male and female pairing as opposed to an asexual pairing or having 6 or 7 genders?
That's a great question. So, I mean, the big thing that natural selection would favor is this idea of allowing for creations of new combinations of genes. So, for example, we all have 23 chromosomes. Right, we have 23 pairs of chromosomes. Now, we pass on one from each pair to our offspring, but what we pass on is not identical to what we inherited, in the sense that, like, let's say, for example, I got a chromosome, I'll just use a number. I got chromosome 2 from my mom, I got chromosome 2 from my dad. What I passed on to my kids is probably neither of those exact ones, but a recombinant version, which has like a piece from mom and a big piece from dad. Now, that sort of mixing is really advantageous for a couple of reasons. First, it really helps produce new combinations that sometimes are actually beneficial. The other thing is it allows you to get rid of bad mutations over several generations much, much more effectively. So that's the big, or it's thought to be at least one of the big advantages of having sort of sexual reproduction as opposed to having purely asexual reproduction where you just make clones. Because with clones, and actually this came up very nicely in Star Trek, it's kind of like making a Xerox copy, right? Mm-hmm. That as you do it, each time it's not, I mean, it's close to perfect. If you look at, if you copy a piece of paper, it's pretty close to perfect, but, maybe there's a couple of errors that are a little bit fainter here or there. It's the same thing that we have, hundreds of mutations introduced every generation as we make our gametes. So if we didn't have some means for error correcting by getting good copies and mixing them with bad copies to erase the bad parts, eventually everything, you'd essentially it's like making a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy. Eventually, it's bad. There's parts you can't read anymore.
Whereas if you've got 2 parents, then you're getting a copy of a copy and a copy of a copy, and the body can default on whichever one is better. Exactly.
Some of the offspring then will inherit the good piece from mom and the good piece from dad, and therefore they have a complete set of good stuff. Right?
Okay. Whereas with asexual reproduction, so with sexual reproduction, there's still mutation going on, but there's a compensating mechanism to allow for fitness. Whereas with asexual reproduction, you're just relying on mutation without some sort of
no way to get rid of bad ones. Yeah.
Gotcha.
They just keep getting passed on. Whereas with the other one, like you can essentially reconstitute the good picture again. Because let's say, for example, the first sentence was a little blurry in mom's, but it was clear in dad's, and the last sentence was a little blurry in dad's, but it's clear in mom's. One of the kids will get basically the good copy from each. Or the grandkids, I guess.
Well, you've talked me into, if I create a new species, I will make it through sexual reproduction. That sounds like it. Like I'm less. Well, actually, one of the things I thought was interesting in the book that you point out is that we're all mutants. I think we've got like kind of an average of 35 chromosomal mutations per parent, so 70. I think it's chromosomal mutations in general. So basically, every generation of human beings is a mutant. Although it should be noted that fraction of mutation is very small compared to the overall genome inherited.
Yes, yeah, we have 3.1 billion bears.
We got
billion. Sorry, million.
Still,
it is billion. I was right the first time. Sorry, getting confused.
but we're all mutants, which I do like. So that's why sexual reproduction is better than asexual reproduction. I might also infer, would it make sense then that the more complex the species, the bigger an issue that's going to be? If we're dealing with like a one-celled organism or a small organism, it might be able to do asexual reproduction. But if it's bigger and there's more genes and more complexity necessary to sustain it, it would be better to have sexual reproduction.
If there's more essential genes, then there's probably more opportunity for a bad mutation to happen there.
Gotcha.
But obviously that's a very average thing, because there's also something that has more genes may also have more error correcting mechanisms. So it's hard to make a total generalization there.
Okay. All right. So that being said, why is it better to have 2 parents as opposed to 7 parents? Why not have multiple genders that are all contributing and squirting DNA at each other?
That's a great question. So I'm just going to guess on this one. I honestly don't know the answer to this one, but my guess is just it's practical. Okay. That if it takes 7 individuals to make an offspring, then you go to a place that only has 5 people, and all of a sudden it goes extinct.
Yeah. Well, and also on a practical level, I mean, me just nailing down one kind of difficult. Me having to coordinate multiple genders, that'd be really tough. I'd have to read a whole lot of books. Men are from Mars, women are from Venus. The other, like if it were all necessary.
So from Jupiter and Saturn.
Yeah. It's like, oh man, this is really complex.
It is funny. The one thing that doesn't seem to come up in Star Trek, but is very abundant in life on Earth, is external fertilization.
Okay, yeah.
So, like, for example, when you're outside and there's pollen everywhere, I mean, that's what's happening is essentially it's plants trying to mate with each other.
It's tree sperm. It's tree sperm floating all over the place.
Exactly. If you're in the sea, there's lots of things that are externally fertilizing. They're just tossing out their gametes and hoping for the best. Mm-hmm. It's funny that doesn't seem to happen in Star Trek, though. Again, I guess it's because we're only seeing humanoid-like things, but there's not much discussion of that.
Although every once in a while they do bring up different scenarios. So you mentioned a couple of things in the book. I think one of them is a species that has multiple genders. I think. Yep. You also bring up there's an episode of Enterprise where a character is, I don't want to say he's impregnated. He's basically he becomes the carrier for another species' offspring without contributing his own DNA, which is a really good plot. I gotta say that's a great. That
was great
because the discomfort is palpable. and there is a species like that on Earth. I think is it the molly, which exists in the Amazon, where I guess it's not quite the same, but the molly is a fish that mates with. It mates with other species, and all that does is activates the genome in it. So the other species doesn't contribute to the genes. That's a fascinating. In which case, the Star Trek would be great with all the people jumping around the galaxy, knocking boots. Well, so
I think the analogy I drew for that one was like the parasitoid wasp, which it's a wasp that comes and basically sticks its eggs into like unsuspecting other insects, and then the other insect basically like devours it from the inside and eventually hatches out of this other thing. Yep. So that's kind of analogous.
Evolution is amazing and horrifying all at the same time.
Definitely both.
Well, so we'll kind of round up the show, Doctor. But I wanted to ask you a few just general questions.
Sure.
The first one I had, the span of Star Trek references in your book is astonishing. You cover every single series. Did you have to employ graduate students to watch films in order to write this book, or do you just have an encyclopedic memory?
Neither of those things. What I actually did is, so I know the science pretty well. Chapter 1, which was more on the chemistry and origin of life. That I didn't know as well, so I had to read a lot on that. But the other parts are things I teach in my class all the time, or I do research on. The Star Trek part, I knew a fair bit of it, but I know if a book is going out to Trekkies, it needs to be complete and it needs to have all the right references. So I did I spent just almost a year where every single night I would either go through a full show script and or watch an episode.
Nice. That is
actually,
dedication.
I think I usually did 2 or 3. Yeah, no, and I went through and I had this big Excel file, and I had in the Excel file the rows were every episode name from every series, which I ended up throwing out the animated series. So like, this is too much. Okay. Yeah. And the columns were basically the chapters of the book. So then as I'd watch the episode, I'd go through the script. I'm like, here's a reference to something about RNA that goes in column number 3, and that's from episode X. And then I'd put a little note in there. So then when I was actually writing, I'd pull out the column that was relevant to that chapter and say like, okay, here's all the content I can work with from Star Trek, and then go from there. So it was about a year's work solid, where every single night, I think I'd usually watch one episode and look at the scripts for 2, because there's over 700 episodes. So
I am greatly impressed with the amount of research you did for that. I genuinely was curious about that. I assumed you were just a genius. You might well be. Yeah. But I just assumed that you sat down to write this down and went, as I recall, when I watched this episode of Voyager 6.5 years ago, Captain Janeway mentions RNA within the context of a hybrid species using it. Yeah, okay, that makes me feel a bit better that you had to use an Excel spreadsheet to do it. Well, so having gone over that gigantic amount of content within the Star Trek universe, do you find that there is a series that is more scientific or less scientific? Like my guess is that probably Discovery and Enterprise are the most scientific, merely because certain concepts had pervaded the culture by that time, whereas TOS, I'm not even sure we knew what DNA was under TOS.
We knew what DNA was, but we hadn't actually sequenced it. So,
okay.
So so we knew it existed. We knew it was the hereditary material at that time.
Okay. Well,
and you're exactly right. And it basically every series reflects our understanding at the time. So one of the things I thought was most striking was, for example, the use of the word genome. I mean, people now hear the word genome. It's still kind of technical, but you've heard the word genome before, right? It's basically all the genetic material in a species. That was never uttered. Well, it was uttered once in Next Generation, but as a proper noun. There was something called the genome colony, but setting that aside, in terms of the scientific use, it was never uttered until Voyager. And then something like 10% of Enterprise episodes talked about genomes. But again, it's sort of matching, and the timing is perfect, because at the time Voyager was airing, was basically a big time in terms of the sequencing of the human genome. So that was hitting the news a lot and things like that. But before that, people didn't talk about genomes, at least in the news. Whereas, when Enterprise aired, the first human genome was out, Drosophila genomes were out. People were talking about genomes, so you can see why it's so abundant. And then you get to Discovery, like, wow, okay, now they talk about things like horizontal gene transfer. They're all over the science in terms of, based on what we know from modern day research. It's very impressive. Now, I should stress all those points that I'm making now are specific to the biology. I think, and Dr. McDonald can answer this much better in terms of the physics, that they were always fairly attuned to the physics, or at least attempting to be fairly attuned to the physics. But it did definitely seem like, at least for the original series, biology was very much an afterthought.
Yeah, I think so. Plus, my take on the original series, I used to really downplay TOS when I was younger, and now I watch it and I'm like, well, I think TOS is really the Twilight Zone in space. It's predominantly exploring, what would happen if there was a planet of only pubescent children? Let's go through that, and then they're working on it. So the science is a backdrop to the plot.
Yep.
So having spent all this time watching Star Trek, having spent an even larger amount of time learning about biology, what are things in Star Trek, or what are scientific concepts or realms of exploration you'd like to see Star Trek explore more? So, for example, like you mentioned in the book, there's an Isaac Asimov quote about how people are very uncreative in terms of looking at alien species and that kind of thing. We kind of talked about different planets that aliens could go on. I'm curious if they were gonna haul you into the next Star Trek series and have you go, this would be a cool topic to explore. What would you be pitching to them?
That's a great idea. So, I guess the answer is cool to me as opposed to cool to I think a lot of audience people would want to watch it. I mean, for me, actually, I really liked, for example, the episode with the microbrain, though I think it went off the rails a little bit at the end there. This was in Next Generation where there's this little light blinky thing, and it was this completely alien life form. And I think that one was also maybe silicon-based. It was definitely not, life as we know it now. But I thought that was really cool. Like, oh, wow, is this thing alive? But the problem that Star Trek tends to do is it immediately jumps from is it alive to is it intelligent, and it almost always the answer is it is. In some way. Intelligence
is a dime a dozen within the Star Trek universe.
It really is. It really is. So I would like to see them just trying to figure out if something actually is alive. So it's interesting that Star Trek, even the original series, people got much more on top of things with respect to whether things were alive in the movies, for example, than in the original series itself. So you might remember in Wrath of Khan, Carol Marcus was very emphatic, like, we're not going to go on this planet and use the Genesis device if there's even a microbe down there. But it'd be interesting to explore, like, what are these microbes? Like, how do microbes there interact? And, and the question you raised earlier was a really good one. I mean, people are always going down to these different planets. So, like, they check, nitrogen oxygen atmosphere, and they just take off all their headgear and stuff.
Yeah.
Like, whoa. There's a lot of other things that can still be bad for you besides just the atmosphere.
Yeah.
But it would be interesting to see, like, some weird interaction between an alien life form that causes, like you said, an allergic reaction or some other kind of reaction. Maybe it, I don't know, maybe it's just, maybe it's actually radioactive. I don't know. It'd be very interesting to explore. It'd be really interesting to really explore new and different life as opposed to just more life that's basically what we see. But I mean, Star Trek has always been a little bit more focused on the sociological issues and the biological ones. So I get that, and then I understand that's more. That's easier for people to digest that because everybody understands, what are generally speaking sociological issues and things like that. So I get why they do that.
Sure. And I'll say, like, from my perspective as an interviewer, Doctor, if you and I were talking about, like, the economics of Vulcan, I could weigh in a lot easier than if we're getting into RNA, where I'm like, all right, I'm relying on the things from your book I read and also, like, 3.5 classes I vaguely remember from 20 years ago.
I hear you. I only had one economics class in college too, so I'm with you the other way.
Oh, nice, perfect. Well, then when I'm on the Star Trek cruise with you, I'll be able to fill in the gaps for other people. Well, so
I'll completely defer to you on that one.
So a couple of final questions.
Sure.
As a scientist, if you were in the Star Trek universe and you were able to do a physical on another species, which one would you be most excited to investigate?
I think I want to go for one of the really different ones. I think I want to check out, like, the Horta, for example.
Right.
That'd be really fascinating. Like, what's inside that?
Like, are there veins? How does that even work? Okay, and then it'd be fascinating. As a professor, what would be if you were going to have next year? You were going to have 2 classes composed entirely of another species from the Star Trek universe. So an entire class of Andorians, or I don't want to prime the question too hard, but something like that. Which one would you be most looking forward to, and which one would you be most not looking forward to?
That's a good question. For not looking forward to, man, the Vulcans would be annoying.
Yeah.
They'd be correcting me all the time and never smiling when I try to say a joke. Oh my gosh, that'd be a very dull class. I wouldn't enjoy that in the least.
See, I think that they would be irritating, but I think I would be most terrified to do a class full of betazoids. Because I think it would be like you're naked all the time. Like, you're coming in and you're like, man, I had a bad date. I'm a little hungover, and everyone in the room knows it.
Exactly. Or looking at this person like, oh man, that was, let's say, for example, somebody asks a question, I'm like, oh, they really should have known that. And I'll think that, and they'll snap me. What do you mean I should have known that? Like, I'm sorry.
Man, Denai over there's dumb as a brick. I don't think he's going to get through college. I mean, he should be doing Votech training with his lack of abstract. Oh no, I thought it again.
That'd be terrible. For most, maybe the Cardassians. I've always found the Cardassians a fascinating species.
Yeah, oh man, they'd be. Have you read A Stitch in Time by chance by Andrew Robinson?
Long time ago.
I love that. Garrick's my favorite character in all of Star Trek. But yeah, I feel like the species most likely to somehow try to create falsities about you as a professor in order to hobble your career to avoid getting a C would probably be the Cardassians. Like they would.
You don't think it would be the Ferengi?
Yeah, no, the Ferengi would just constantly be trying to bribe you. Like you'd like.
Well, that's true.
You would like get your test. There would be like $50, at the bottom of the test with a paperclip.
Actually. The Stitch in Time book you were mentioning, actually, sorry, that was a different book than the one I was thinking. I have not read that one. Sorry, I just realized that.
It's a good deep dive on Cardassians.
Gotcha.
It's a fun one. Well, Doctor, I have really enjoyed talking to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I really enjoyed talking with you, too.
And for listeners that want to follow you and follow your work, where's the best place to check you out?
Best place is on Twitter at MAF, like Frank Noor, and like November OOR.
Wonderful. Well, I'm going to do that, and thanks again.
Thank you for having me.
Normally after the interview, I do some vagabonding with fellow comedian Nick Sperduti, where we talk about a planet that we visited, what we thought about it after performing comedy there. We're going to put a little bit of a delay on that because here a few weeks ago we visited Kashyyyk, and Nick ended up saving the life of 6 Wookiees, and they now owe him a life debt and have been staying at his 2-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn. And then a couple weeks later, this is really surprising, but we went to Naboo, and he saved the life of a Gungan, and ditto, the life debt, and they do not get along. And that has just been causing a lot of misery in Nick's life and to an increasing extent in my life. So rather than reviewing a planet this week, we're going to bring out a protocol droid to try and save this situation. Where is the protocol droid?
It's under this blanket. But my main issue is that right now, I can't even use a lot of the money I was getting in from my Airbnb because I was Airbnb in my second bedroom,
right.
And now that has been completely taken over as well. My bathroom's got a Gungan in the tub, and Joe Blobe is the worst. Did we talk about how bad Joe Blobe was?
We've talked about how awful Joe Blobe is. If nothing else, I just want to get rid of that.
Okay.
My preferred outcome is the Wookiee stay and the Gungan leaves.
My preferred outcome is to be left alone.
Yeah, I get that, but still rooting for the Wookiees.
Let's just... I'm sorry. Let me just take that sheet off.
Oh, hello. I am AJ-19, Human-Cyborg Relations.
Hey.
I'm Andrew.
I'm Nick.
This is Nick. I go by Heaton, though. It makes me feel more chummy. Anyway,
I go by Nick.
Nice to meet you, AJ. So here's the sitch. We have one of these wacky, multiple Wookiee life debts plus Gungan life debt scenarios.
Classic sitcom sort of situation.
And been causing a headache for everybody involved. We're hoping you could pull out some, droid legalese, and, we'd yell out Code Excelsior, and the Gungan would go away.
So your issue is that you're living in an apartment with 6 Wookiees and a Gungan.
Nick is, yeah.
I am, yeah.
I see.
Oh, also, I didn't even add this. Oh, my God. Okay, do you know what a porg is?
I do.
Okay. Real cute, right? Real cute. Look like half puffin, half kitten. I'm not real sure what the etymology is. So one of the Wookiees, his name is Tarful. He got a porg as a pet. Then all the other Wookiees, they want to have pet porgs. So now there's 6 of these things living there. There's 6 porgs in addition to the 6 Wookiees. And Joe Blobe wanted a pet, so he got an iguana.
He didn't know what was going on.
He didn't. So anyway, there's just a whole lot going on.
We didn't even want a dog. My wife still refuses to get a dog, and now she has a good reason.
And she got 6 porgs and an iguana.
Well, it sounds like to me you can just ask them to leave the apartment. That is, of course, unless you're in a life debt with all 7, which would be really absurd. Would really complicate the situation otherwise.
That is.
Oh, no, we left that part out. Yeah. It's that exact scenario.
Yeah.
It's he's got a life. Now, he doesn't have a life debt with the porgs, but he does have a life debt with the Wookiees and the Gungan.
And maybe the iguana. I'm not 100%.
Yeah.
7 life debts.
Possibly.
In that case, the simplest solution, according to my computing, is for the member that has each of the life debts to perish.
Oh, okay.
Thereby freeing each of the creatures of their life debts and allowing them to leave the apartment.
Seems pretty straightforward.
No, wait. So you're saying if I die, then it's all good? Yeah, but that's not. No, Heaton, don't.
No, we're not going to kill you. But I think what he's saying is that we fake your death.
Oh,
we fake your death. You lay low for 20, 30 years.
20, 30 years?
Yeah, and then come back and they'll clear out. Unless hold on. Do they have to take care of his spouse?
In terms of Wookiee life debts, yes, they would end up having to take care of the spouse.
So we fake a car wreck. You both appear to die.
We live in New York. We don't take cars.
Oh, well, anyway, we figure something out. And then, I'll watch your place / use it as a clubhouse with my Wookiee friends. And then you come back when they go on vacation or something.
This all is turning out. It's just so much crazier than I even thought it could be. Can we is there any way for me other than me dying to just ask them to just...
Well, you would have to convince the Wookiees that part of their life debt to you is to leave you alone. If you ask them that, then based on their Wookiee life debt, they would have to listen to you and therefore leave you alone.
Oh, that seems pretty straightforward. That seems like a really,
What about Joe Blob?
Gungan life debts are slightly different.
Okay, I want to be real fucking clear about this. We are not keeping the fucking Gungan and getting rid of the Wookiees, okay? Nick, I'm laying my foot down here. I realize this is your problem, but I hang out with you a lot. I am not coming over if you have a Gungan and no Wookiees.
I agree. I don't want to have... I mean, to be fair, Joe Blob, one of the only people actually bringing in some money. I'll give him that.
Yeah, right.
He is a political consultant. He's actually making some bucks, as is Chewbacca.
Yeah.
But
she works on Fiverr. She does some graphical
designs.
Yeah.
But it's one of those things where I don't really know what to do in this situation other than just pretend to die or move.
Yeah, I think fake your own death. Can we talk about me for a minute?
What?
AJ?
AJ 19.
Yeah,
Human
okay.
cyborg relations.
So a little bit more of a spin on this that I could use your help for. So we mentioned Chewbacca a minute ago.
Right.
Real nice lady. Real cool. Good friend of mine. Just a friend. The other night, we were watching The Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou. We're cuddling on the couch, which I think makes sense because she's basically, from a cuddling perspective, she's like a 7-foot-tall Labrador Retriever. So I was like, well, great. Let's pump in some oxytocin, get some free touching in. And, but again, not sexual.
Ugh.
However, I would have felt the same way.
No, go ahead.
Anyway, apparently she thinks we're dating now. And that was not at all the vibe I was putting out. And it is getting very awkward. And I'm not really sure how to walk this back. I want to stress this. Didn't make a move.
I'll be honest.
Didn't make a move.
The rest of the Wookiees are talking. I've been talking to Sprankles about it, and he's mad.
We have a D&D group.
Not me.
And I'm the DM, and last Wednesday was very awkward. And I just it was tense. It wasn't awkward, it was tense. And Chewbacca's really nice, and I don't want to hurt her feelings or anything, but it's just I don't know how to navigate this.
The relationship between humans and Wookiees can be complicated.
Yeah.
Let me ask one clarifying question. Did you initiate the cuddle?
I can't remember.
Yeah, no, I saw it. 100%.
Did it.
You jumped on the couch and said, "Let's cuddle." I saw it.
Okay. No one really remembers.
I remember. It was definitely.
I am fluent in over 6 million forms of communication, and one of them is the language of love.
Oh.
And from my professional droid perspective, you are, how do humans say it? Full of shit?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Wait, hold on, though.
You like her.
If a cat jumps in my lap, I'm not like, oh, I'm dating the cat.
Cat, feline, not sentient, lives on Earth. Impossible to form romantic bonds.
Well, but in this scenario, I'm the cat. I jumped onto her lap. Wookiee. I'm the cat.
Wookiee, sentient, human, sentient, possible to form romantic bond.
Yeah.
I
do not see the comparison.
Okay. So then...
It's a bad analogy.
Okay, here's... What I don't want to do is this, okay? I'm happy to try anything except direct communication because I feel like that would be very awkward and I'm conflict averse. So what I'm thinking I'm going to do is just be real cold until she figures it out on her own. And then we go back to the status quo. Does that sound like a good idea?
Have you seen Wookiees angry?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Look,
shit.
Have you seen that Wookiee-sized hole in my wall?
Oh, man. Yeah. There's... okay, so...
I think you just solved your own problem. You told me you would do anything but directly communicate, when in fact, that is simply the only answer.
Can we talk about my situation?
Right, okay, so if we fake Nick's death, maybe she'll be so overcome with grief that she won't want to date anybody?
I'm not going to fake my own death.
Then I'll be like, oh, Chewbacca, this is, such a weird time, what with Nick being stone cold. I think we should just be friends till we figure this out. You're a swell gal, though.
I have spoken to many different forms of life throughout my I suppose you wouldn't call it life as a droid, but since I was first programmed. And I find that humans are the most adverse to just saying how they feel. If you have an honest conversation with Chewbacca, which I think will lead to you saying that you do like her.
What?
You can...
I think so, too.
Okay.
Genuinely.
No, I do like Chewbacca. I'm just not sexually attracted to a 7-foot-tall, fur-covered Wookiee.
I do think maybe you not only like Chewbacca, I think maybe that you like Chewbacca.
No, I'm telling you.
Okay, we all see it. All of the guys and I are talking.
I've been turned on for 5 minutes and I see it.
Yeah, he's noticed it.
Oh.
And here's the thing. Let's just sorry, can we get just back to this real quick? So if we can't get them to leave the life debt, can we at least get the Gungan, can we get Joe Blow to like communicate better with the Wookiees? That's really kind of what I was hoping for with when I got you.
Gungans and Wookiees are historically not very well when put together in small
telling
space.
me, yeah.
He knows what he's talking about. Yeah.
I would recommend, is there a way to cut off the food source to the Gungan? Are you keeping things like coffee grounds around?
Yeah.
Gungans are very scrappy creatures and will eat anything. I see that you do have a tree standing in the middle of your room.
Yeah.
And
that was a Wookiee
for
thing.
Life Day coming up. Life Day's coming up.
Of course. So. I would recommend either cutting off the Gungan's food source or forcing it to create a life debt with another being, which would cancel out your life debt.
So we can get him to
I'm not.
save. You can save him.
No. 1,000% no.
Well, yeah, but come on, wouldn't you just
I
be
would rather eat a blaster than save that thing's life. I thought the solution was lock this thing in the closet till it starves to death. And I wasn't going to do that because I'm against murder, but that's where my head's at because I don't like the Gungan.
Well...
All right.
Thank you for AJ.
This was okay. So then I think the takeaway from this is we can make the Wookiees go away. The Gungan is here unless it starves to death, and I have to go on a date with Chewbacca. Is that where we're at?
That's how I see it. Right.
All right. Well, AJ, it was very nice to meet you. I guess we'll take you back to the Jawa crawler now.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, if we just...
we just needed... It was like a consultation type thing.
Where's that blanket?
You purchased me, and you are now my master. That is... the droid code.
But if we took you back to the Jawa crawler, we could just get
don't take me
store
back
credit
there.
Maybe.
Don't take me back there.
AJ?
They would just dismantle me and sell me for parts. If you brought back a droid to a Jawa, they would think there was something wrong with me and they would dismantle me for parts, effectively killing me, although I don't have life and my programming and everything. I have to stay here.
So.
Okay. Well, I'm fine with that. I feel like if anything, he'll probably mediate stuff.
Are you kidding? So 8? Now I'm up to 8 life debts? Is that what's happening here?
I don't
He's
take
not really
up
a
much
life
room.
debt. He's more like a kind of a reverse hostage where if you get rid of him, he dies.
That's basically a life debt.
Yeah, I guess so. I guess it's even worse because, he'll be killed. Yeah.
And he also heard me talking about the whole faking my death thing, so he's going to be in on it.
You know what? I think you should view this as not like there's another sapient life debt thing in your apartment. Think of it more like there's a talking hat rack. Huh?
I do look good in hats.
Yeah.
Well, that's clear.
Well, AJ, I'm going to go, I guess, get some movie tickets or some shit. And we'll talk to you later.
Thanks, man.
That's the show. We're smarter. We're more fun. We know stuff about genetics. A big thank you to Dr. Mohamed Noor of Duke University for coming on the program. What a delightful human being. Thank you, Taylor Standridge, for audio engineering. And thank you, Nick Sperduti and Kevin Delano, for applying the full ferocity of your comedic genius to science fiction.